The story is titled, He Designed the Prison to be Inescapable. Then he proved it wasn't. They tell you that arrogance is a slow poison, but in my case, it was a signature on a blueprint. I didn't just break the law, I built the vault they buried me in. The transport bus smelled of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. I sat with my forehead pressed against the grated window, watching the landscape shift from the green chaos of the free world to the sterile gray of the perimeter. Most men on that bus saw a fortress. I saw the geometry. I saw the load-bearing ratios of the outer wall, the calculated blind spots of the watchtowers, and the psychological oppression woven into the very brutalist architecture. I knew the exact tensile strength of the fencing because I was the one who specified it in the budget. My name is Elias Thorne, 54, male. In a previous life, I was an award-winning architect contracted by the state to solve their containment problem. I gave them Blackwood Correctional. I promised them it was inescapable, a perfect closed loop of surveillance and concrete. And for that, they called me a visionary. Then the embezzlement charges hit, structural negligence, money funneled into offshore accounts, a collapsed wing in a different project that killed 3 families. The judge didn't appreciate the irony when he sentenced me to 15 years in my own masterpiece. Stepping off the bus wasn't just an arrival, it was an inspection. The intake yard was designed to funnel wind, dropping the ambient temperature by 10 degrees to keep inmates shivering and docile. It worked. I felt the chill bite through my thin jumpsuit, rattling my teeth. The guards didn't look at us as men. They looked at us as inventory. I knew the processing flow, Station A to Station D, because I had optimized it for maximum dehumanization. Strip, cough, squat. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed at a frequency I had selected to induce subtle, low-grade anxiety. Standing there naked, holding my clothes in a bundle, I felt the first heavy, crushing weight of my own competence. I had done my job too well. "Eyes forward, dirt," a guard barked, shoving a man 2 spots ahead of me. I recognized the guard's station. Bulletproof glass, angled to deflect glare. I knew that if he pressed the silent alarm under the desk, the mag locks on the doors would seal with 200 pounds of force in under 3 seconds. Knowing how the trap worked didn't make being inside it any less terrifying. In fact, it was worse. The ignorance of the other men was a mercy I didn't have. They walked us to Unit 4, the deep freeze. This was maximum security, built for the state's worst. The acoustics in the hallway were designed to carry the sound of footsteps, but muffle conversation, isolating prisoners even when they were walking in a line. The clank of the heavy steel doors echoing through the block sounded like a tomb sealing shut. My cell was 04B, 6 by 8 feet. I knew the dimensions intimately. I had argued for 6 by 8 instead of 8 by 10 to save on HVAC costs. I walked in, and the walls felt like they were pressing against my chest. My cellmate was already there, lying on the top bunk, staring at the ceiling. Marcus Crow Vane, 29, male. He didn't look down when I entered. He was a slab of muscle and scar tissue, serving life for a double homicide that had made the evening news a decade ago. The tattoo of a spider web covered his throat, vanishing under his collar. "Top bunk's mine," Crow said, his voice like gravel grinding in a mixer. "You snore. You bleed." "Understood," I whispered. My voice sounded thin, pathetic. I sat on the bottom bunk. The mattress was thin, fire-retardant foam on a steel slab bolted to the wall. I ran my hand along the cold concrete. It was Class A structural mix, reinforced with rebar every 4 inches. Impenetrable. I stared at the toilet, a stainless steel combo unit. I knew the plumbing chase behind the wall was narrow, barely 12 inches wide, filled with jagged pipe clamps to prevent crawling. Night fell hard. The lights didn't turn off. They just dimmed to a sickly amber glow, another feature I'd implemented to disrupt circadian rhythms and prevent deep REM sleep. Lying there, staring at the underside of Crow's bunk, the reality of my timeline washed over me. 15 years. The prison was breathing around me. I could hear the distant rhythmic slamming of gates, the murmur of the boiler system in the basement, the shouted threats from the tier above. I had designed this place to break the human spirit, to turn hope into a mathematical impossibility. I had created a monster of steel and stone, a beast that ate time and excreted misery, and now I was in its belly. I closed my eyes, trying to visualize the blueprints, searching for a mistake, an oversight, a forgotten corner. But the image in my mind was crisp and flawless. I had been precise. I had been arrogant. I had built the perfect cage. "Welcome home, architect," I whispered to myself, the words dying in the cold amber air. Above me, Crow shifted, and a small shower of dust fell from the mattress support. It landed on my face. It felt like dirt from a grave. This wasn't just a prison sentence, it was a burial, and I was the one who had poured the concrete. You don't serve time in Blackwood, time serves you, slice by slice, until there's nothing left but gristle. 6 months bled into a gray smear of routine. I stopped being Elias Thorne, the architect, and became inmate 8940. I learned the rhythm of the beast I lived inside. The lights hummed on at 500 hours, a jagged, piercing white LED spectrum I had selected specifically to inhibit melatonin production. It worked. I woke up every morning with eyes that felt like they were filled with sand, my heart hammering a frantic, sour rhythm against my ribs. Survival meant shrinking. I learned to navigate the yard by staring at the concrete, counting steps. I knew the yard was exactly 44 yards across because I had drawn the perimeter to maximize the line of sight for the tower gunners. If you stood in the northeast corner, you were in the kill zone, a spot where 3 different rifles had a clear trajectory. I avoided that corner. Others didn't. I watched a man named Griggs get stabbed there over a packet of ramen. The response team was on him in 90 seconds. I had calculated a response time of 60. The guards were getting lazy. That was the first crack. Not in the walls, but in the operation. Inside the cell, the air was thick with unsaid violence. Crow was a predator who had decided, for reasons I couldn't fathom, to keep me as a pet rather than prey. He ate half my food tray. He took the single pillow I was allotted, but he didn't let anyone else touch me. "You got soft hands, architect," Crow rumbled one night, hanging off the top bunk, his face upside down, eyes black and flat like a shark's. "Hands like that don't dig. They just draw lines." "Lines keep the roof up," I muttered, turning a page of a tattered paperback I'd found in the day room. "Lines keep us in," he corrected. "You think you're smart because you built the box, but you're just a rat who knows where the maze walls are. You don't know where the cheese is." He was right. I was paralyzed by my own knowledge. Every time I looked at a door, I saw the maglocks, the fail-safes, the redundant circuits. I saw the impossibility of it. But the prison was wearing me down. The noise was the worst part. The acoustics of Block 4 were designed to amplify distress frequencies, shouts, metal clashing, sobbing. It created a chaotic din that kept stress levels high, preventing inmates from organizing. But living in it was like having a power drill pressed against my temple. I was fraying. The numbness was fading, replaced by a sharp, vibrating desperation. Then came the Tuesday of the shakedown. Officer Kalen, the shift commander, had it out for me. He was a petty tyrant with a thick neck and eyes that gleamed when he inflicted pain. He liked the irony of my situation. He kicked open our cell door, his baton already slapping against his palm. "Room inspection, ladies," Kalen sneered. "Toss it." They tore everything apart. It wasn't about contraband. It was about dominance. They ripped the sheets, dumped the toilet water onto the floor, and stepped on family photos. Kalen cornered me against the back wall, pressing the tip of his baton into my sternum. "Is this up to code, Mr. Thorne?" He whispered, his breath smelling of stale coffee and peppermint. He shoved me hard. I stumbled back, my shoulder slamming into the ventilation grate near the floor. Pain shot down my arm, but something else happened. A sound. Clink. It wasn't the dull thud of heavy-gauge hardened security steel. It was a tinny, hollow rattle. Kalen laughed and walked out, leaving us in the wreckage of our cell. Crow was raging, cursing the air, throwing the mattress back onto the slab. But I stayed on the floor, my hand gripping my bruised shoulder, staring at the grate. I had specified grade 8 ballistic steel for all ventilation covers. They were supposed to be welded to the rebar inside the concrete pour, immovable, unbreakable. I crawled over to it. I waited until Crow was busy cursing at the tier runner through the bars. I pressed my thumb against the screw head, holding the grate in place. It was a security torque screw designed to be tamper-proof, but the metal around the screw head was flaking. Rust. Grade 8 steel doesn't rust. Not like this. Not in 6 months. I scratched at the paint with my fingernail. Beneath the industrial gray coating, the metal was dark, pitted, and soft. My heart stopped, then restarted at double speed. The contractors. Those greedy, corner-cutting bastards. I had designed a fortress, but the men who built it had stolen the budget. They had swapped the ballistic steel for cheap, localized iron. They had likely pocketed the difference, millions of dollars, assuming no one would ever test the vents in a prison designed to be inescapable. They didn't know the architect would be living in cells 04B. I looked up. Crow was watching me now, his rage replaced by a sudden, intense curiosity. He saw the way I was looking at the vent. He saw the shift in my eyes, from the dull glaze of a prisoner to the sharp, calculating focus of an engineer. "What is it?" Crow asked, his voice low, dangerous. "They cheated," I whispered, a terrifying smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. "The ventilation system. It's not a vault, Crow. It's a tin can. Can we open it?" I looked at the screws, then at the cheap metal grate, then back at him. "We don't need to open it. We just need to dissolve it." The plan didn't start with a map. It started with a lie. The perfect prison had a flaw, and for the first time since I stepped off that bus, the walls didn't look like they were closing in. They looked like they were waiting to be broken. Chemistry is a patient killer. It doesn't scream. It whispers. For 3 weeks, my life narrowed down to the circumference of 4 screw heads. The grade 8 steel was a lie, but it was still metal, and metal doesn't give up easily. I became a hoarder of the mundane. Salt packets from the cafeteria, vinegar we traded cigarettes for, and a specific industrial descalaire Crow managed to steal from a janitor's cart during a hallway mopping detail. We made a paste, a corrosive sludge that smelled like a dying battery. Every night, under the cover of the 3 a.m. shift change, I would crawl to the corner of the cell. Crow would hang a blanket from the top bunk, creating a shadow puppet show for the cameras while I worked. I applied the paste to the screws, letting the acidity eat into the cheap iron. Then I would scratch away the softened rust with a tool I'd fashioned from a stiffened plastic toothbrush handle, filed to a point against the concrete floor. My hands were perpetually stained orange from the rust. I told the guards it was a fungal infection. I stopped washing them to keep the alibi. The psychological weight of the work was heavier than the concrete. I had designed Blackwood to isolate men, to make them distrust each other. But here, in the belly of my own monster, I was forced to place my life entirely in the hands of a double homicide. Crow didn't just watch my back. He became the wall between me and the world. When I was too exhausted to stand at count, he held me up. When a new inmate in the block tried to pressure me for my dessert tray, my source of tradable sugar, Crow broke 2 of the man's fingers in the shower. He didn't say a word to me about it. I just saw the blood on his knuckles later. "You build the door, architect," he said that night, staring at the dark ceiling. "I'll handle the dogs." The cost of escape wasn't just physical labor, it was moral erosion. To get the extra descaler, Crow had to call in a debt with a runner in Unit C. That runner got caught. I heard the screams from the solitary wing 3 floors down. I knew the acoustics. I knew exactly how the ventilation carried the sound of a baton striking flesh. I had designed the ducts to carry air, but they carried agony just as well. A man was being flayed alive because I needed 2 ounces of chemical solvent. I lay on my bunk, trembling, listening to the echoes of my own ambition. Then came the night the first screw turned. It didn't come loose with a triumphant crack. It gave way with a sickly, wet crunch, the rusted threads stripping like wet cardboard. I held my breath. 1, 3 to go. But the prison fights back. It always does. 2 days before we were ready to move, Officer Kalin tossed the cell again. He didn't have a reason. He was just bored. He kicked through our belongings, his boots heavy and unpredictable. I stood by the door, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The paste was wiped clean, the screws covered with a mixture of gray soap and dust to mimic the paint. But if he touched them, if he applied even a fraction of pressure, the illusion would collapse. Kalen stopped by the vent. He rested his boot on the grate, leaning forward to sneer at Crow. "You look comfortable, Vane," Kalen said, shifting his weight. I watched the grate flex. The cheap iron groaned under his boot. A hairline fracture of the soap paint appeared near the bottom screw. If he looked down, if he saw the fresh crack in the weld, we were dead. I calculated the force he was applying. 180 pounds of torque on a weakened structure. It was going to snap. "Crow," I said, my voice cracking. "The letter." Crow didn't hesitate. He knew the code. He suddenly lunged at the bars, shouting a stream of filth about Kalen's mother. It was a suicide play. Kalen's attention snapped away from the vent. He spun around, baton raising, forgetting the floor, forgetting the grate. He beat Crow into the corner. It lasted 2 minutes. I stood there freezing, watching my partner take the blows that were meant for me, meant for the hole in the wall. When Kalen left, panting and satisfied, Crow was bleeding from the eye and mouth, but the grate was untouched. Did it hold?" Crow wheezed, spitting a tooth onto the floor. "It held," I whispered, falling to my knees beside him. "We have to go. Tonight. Before he comes back." We waited for the storm. I knew the atmospheric pressure patterns of the region. I knew a low-pressure system was moving in. The rain started at midnight, lashing against the high windows, the thunder masking the sounds of the prison settling. At 0200, I removed the final screw. It fell into my hand, warm and heavy. We pried the grate loose. It came away with a silent sigh of dust. Behind it lay the darkness of the intake shaft. It was tighter than I remembered. On the blueprints, this was a 20-inch clearance. In reality, with the shoddy construction, it was barely 16. I crawled in head first. The air inside tasted of stale dust and old secrets. I shimmied forward, my shoulders scraping the galvanized steel, panic rising in my throat like bile. This was the claustrophobia I had inflicted on thousands, now wrapping its hands around my own throat. I reached the first junction, the sensor array. This was the moment of truth. I had specified thermal and motion sensors every 50 feet. If they were active, an alarm would trigger in the control room instantly. I held up a stolen fragment of mirror to check the corner. I saw the sensor box. It was there, mounted on the wall. The LED status light was dark. I crawled closer, heart pounding, and reached out to touch it. The plastic casing felt flimsy. I pried the cover off with my fingernail. It was empty. There were no wires, no circuit board, just a plastic shell glued to the wall to satisfy a visual inspection. The contractors hadn't just used cheap steel. They had gutted the electronic security entirely. They had billed the state for millions in tech and installed plastic toys. I wanted to laugh, but the sound would have killed us. My arrogance had built the prison, but their greed had left the back door unlocked. "Clear!" I hissed back into the darkness. Crow squeezed in behind me, his bulk filling the shaft, blocking out the faint amber light of the cell. There was no turning back now. We were in the veins of the beast. Ahead of us lay 300 feet of vertical climb through the utility chase, followed by the roof access I prayed hadn't been reinforced. I crawled forward, the sharp edges of the unfinished sheet metal slicing my palms. I didn't feel the pain. I only felt the terrifying electric current of the unknown. For the first time in 15 years, I wasn't following a plan. I was just surviving. The vertical chase was a throat of galvanized steel, choked with dust and the smell of ozone. We climbed using the jagged bracing struts I had drawn on a drafting table 6 years ago. In my blueprints, these struts were clean, equidistant lines. In reality, they were sharp, uneven, and slick with condensation. Crow was struggling. I could hear his breathing below me, a wet, rattling sound that meant Kalen's baton had likely cracked a rib, maybe punctuated a lung. The man who had been my shield was now a dead weight dragging behind me in the dark. "Keep moving," I hissed, the words scraping my throat. "Another 20 feet to the service hatch." "I'm there," Crow grunted, but the pause before he spoke was too long. We reached the roof access. It should have been a heavy hydraulic-assisted hatch with a keypad entry. Instead, it was a manual iron cover secured with a padlock. I almost laughed. A padlock. I pulled a shim I'd made from a soda can tab out of my sock. I didn't need to be a master thief. The lock was a generic hardware store brand, rusted by the elements. It popped open with a dull click that was swallowed by a clap of thunder. I pushed the hatch up. The wind caught it, ripping it from my grip and slamming it against the tar paper roof. The storm was a physical blow. Rain, freezing and violent, lashed against us. It washed the grave dirt and rust from my skin, stinging my eyes. We crawled out onto the roof of Blackwood Correctional. From up here, the yard looked like a toy set, the watchtowers like lighthouses blinking through the deluge. "Which way?" Crow shouted over the gale, clutching his side. "North corner," I yelled back. "The lightning protection system. The grounding cable runs down the exterior wall. It's copper, braided. It'll hold." We scrambled across the slick tar. I slipped twice, my knees tearing against the gravel ballast. When we reached the edge, I looked down. It was a 40-foot drop into the mud of the construction easement, a blind spot I had fought the contractors on, arguing it was too close to the tree line. They had ignored me to save on clearing costs. Now their frugality was our ladder. I found the cable. It was thick, anchored to the parapet. "Wrap your jacket around your hands," I ordered Crow. "Don't let go until your feet hit the mud." Crow looked at me. His face was a mask of bruises and rain. "You first, architect. If I fall, I knock you off." I didn't argue. I wrapped my hands and swung over the edge. The cable was slick. I descended in jerky, terrifying bursts, my boots scrabbling for purchase on the wet concrete. Halfway down, the anchor bolt above me groaned. I felt the cable drop 3 inches. The cheap masonry was failing. I hit the ground hard, rolling into the slurry of mud and clay. I looked up just in time to see Crow coming down. He was moving too fast. He lost his grip 10 feet up and fell, landing with a sickening thud that shook the ground. I scrambled to him. He was groaning, clutching his leg. "Go," he wheezed. "Leg's done." "Get up," I snarled, grabbing him by the collar of his jumpsuit. "I didn't chew through a steel wall just to leave you in the mud." We moved like a 3-legged animal, stumbling into the tree line just as the perimeter floodlights swept over the spot where we had landed. We ran until the air burned in our chests, until the prison was nothing but a glow on the horizon, until the silence of the woods was louder than the sirens. Freedom isn't a triumphant trumpet blast. It's a motel room in Ohio, with yellow wallpaper and a dripping faucet. It's been 8 months. We split up in Kentucky. Crow went west. He said he had family in Nevada, or maybe he just wanted to see a desert, somewhere without walls. I haven't heard from him. I check the obituaries every day, scanning for John Doe, but so far nothing. Maybe he made it. Maybe he's finally just Marcus again. I work as a night shift janitor at a mall under the name Frank. I mop floors, I empty trash, I fix broken locks, but I am not free. I live in a small apartment on the 2nd floor. I chose it because it has 2 exits. Every time I enter a room, I instinctively calculate the load-bearing capacity of the floor joists. When I sit in a diner, I sit with my back to the wall watching the door. I count the seconds it takes for the waitress to walk from the counter to my table. I wake up at a 500 every morning, my body still tuned to the buzzer that no longer sounds. I can't sleep in the dark. I keep a lamp on, a poor substitute for the amber security lights. Sometimes I drive past construction sites. I see the skeletons of new buildings going up, schools, hospitals, banks. I see the steel beams, the concrete pours, the ventilation ducts, and I see the lies. I see where the foreman skimmed the budget. I see where the safety glass is just plate glass. I see the cracks before they happen. I escaped Blackwood, but I didn't leave it. I carry the blueprints in my head, superimposed over the entire world. Every room is a cell, every door is a temporary delay, and every person is a potential threat. The state thinks I'm still running, that I'm out here enjoying the wind on my face. They don't understand. The punishment wasn't the prison I built. The punishment is knowing that the whole world is built by the same greedy, incompetent hands, held together by rust and luck. I'm not the architect anymore. I'm just the man who knows the walls are paper thin, waiting for the roof to come down.